So welcome to this webinar organized by the Teaching Forum of the PCST. The Teaching Forum is an active forum for PCST aimed at exchanging experiences with teaching science communication and thus improving our science communication teaching. And we do this by meeting regularly, by activities such as mentoring, where we help each other out, by researching science comm programs around the world, by organizing webinars such as this one, and also by organizing sessions at PCST conferences, as in next Aberdeen conference in May. Before I go to today's session, there's one point I'd like to mention, because of the situation around inclusion, also PCST is organizing a member forum. It's not a webinar, but it's a member forum on the 19th of March. And so if you have an interest, or if you're worried about the aspect of diversity and inclusion, particularly, of course, in the practice of science communication, you can go to the PCST webinar and as a member register for this forum. And this forum will not be recorded for obvious reasons. Okay, today is going to be about how to teach social research skills to students who often have a natural or life sciences background. My students, for instance, I teach in a master myself, often ask when they need a theoretical approach, for instance, because they're doing science comm research or they're designing an intervention. They often ask, how on earth should I decide which theory I should select? Because in social sciences, there are so many theories that resemble each other, that are overlapping, for instance. And then in doing their research, or for instance, designing their intervention, what skills are crucial? For instance, if I'm doing qualitative research, do we need to teach them how to code interviews, for instance? And should we offer specific courses in teaching research skills to them? Or should they learn this on the go, for instance? Okay, so this is more or less the context of this webinar. And today we're going to have 3 speakers who will each discuss their views on teaching social skills. Before going to Julia Sarong and Luisa Maserani, first there's going to be Felicity Meller. Felicity is the director of the Science Communication Unit at Imperial College London at the UK. She has a background in theoretical physics, and she's been a lecturer in astronomy. And since 2001, she's been teaching in a master program that she oversees now for many years. She publishes on topics such as narratives in science communication and science journalism. As Felicity needs to leave this webinar after her talk, we will follow up with questions directly further. Please, Felicity, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Franz. Yeah, thank you for the invitation to speak at this panel. I'm very sorry, everyone, that I have to leave a bit early. And it's a really important topic we're discussing, how we can get our students to a point of being able to investigate issues around science communication. As Franz mentioned, I have for over 20 years been involved with the Science Communication Masters programme at Imperial College. So I'm going to be talking about how we do things on that programme. Siddharth is going to share a slide which sketches out the context of that programme. So you probably won't take all of this in, but broadly, we have 2 separate programmes, the MSc in Science Communication and MSc in Science Media Production. The latter, the Science Media Production course, is a little bit more practical than the other one. They both balance academic and practical work, but science media production is a bit more practical. And so I'm not going to say much really about that programme. It's shown at the bottom of this diagram, and the modules I've greyed out are ones which are taken only by those students. You'll see there's also some shared modules in the middle there, and the programme I'm going to talk about more is the MSc in Science Communication. So that course has about 35 to 40 students each year. It's a 1-year course, or 2-year for part-timers, but we don't have many part-timers each year. It's been running for about 34 years now, so it's been going a good long time, and probably hasn't changed a huge amount since then. Oops, we've lost the slides. It's been fairly stable. And most of our students are science graduates, so that's a key point for this discussion. So they come in, some of them might have done a little bit of studying of the humanities, but certainly not in any full-on way for the most part. So we see our aim as to take them out of science, and we do that by stressing that they've become humanities students the moment they walk through the door on the first day of the first term. So we're very much about trying to orient them towards the humanities. At the same time, the point is for them to become reflexive practitioners. So it's a vocational course. They're not, for the most part, aiming to go straight on to PhDs. Some do eventually come round to PhDs in science communication relevant topics, usually after they've been out in the workplace for a while. So the whole course is geared up to preparing them for communication careers. But we think it's really important in doing that to encourage them to see science more critically and to have a critical understanding of the relationship between science and society. So for that reason, we have a number of academic modules, particularly in the first half of the year. And these are the ones I've shown in blue on this diagram. The ones in italics are optional modules, and the ones not in italics are core modules. So there's this balance between those academic modules and then a whole load of practical work, which is what the other modules shown here is. As I said, with the aim of them eventually becoming reflexive practitioners. Now, for the topic that we're interested in today, teaching research skills, one thing that might immediately strike you in this diagram is that there's no box saying research methods. So we don't have any very explicit teaching of research methodologies. And indeed, because we're really very focused on humanities, I think that would be unusual anyway. So we're not really orientating ourselves to the social sciences, although social science methods are relevant. Now I've shaded in blue a couple of these modules which are most relevant to the teaching of research methods. The first is a core academic module that I teach in the first term called the Media Representation of Science. And there I do smuggle in some research methods, but very much through doing rather than talking about the methodology. So these modules are all scaffolded with coursework assignments, and in this module I set 2 assignments where the students do their own little mini research project, really mini. I mean, they've got 2 weeks from beginning to end on top of attending lectures. And the first of these assignments I set them is a quantitative content analysis of the media coverage of science. So they can choose to approach that in any way they like, but they have to collect a sample of media texts and analyze these in a quantitative way. So they'll be setting up a coding frame and a spreadsheet and recording some data, and then writing a 2,000-word essay drawing on the data that they've produced. And I used to set that the minute they arrived. The very first thing I say, do this and use your common sense. They're all numerate. They know how to use a spreadsheet. I can take that for granted as they're science graduates. But what a what you can't take for granted is that they're able to excavate that data in a way that then draws out an interesting essay. So I think that's the challenge for them. And I use that assignment as a stepping stone into more qualitative methods. So the second assignment I set is essentially a discourse analysis. And again, I do it as a little mini project. I say, find an interesting text about science and conduct a discourse analysis on it. And in the classes, I'll have talked a bit about, well, we have a session all about semiotics, and a bit about rhetoric. So they've got certain analytical tools that they can then draw on in to conduct this discourse analysis. But very much from a humanities perspective, in that it's essentially a close reading, what humanities scholars would call a close reading, rather than having a rigid theoretical framework which they then follow in terms of you know, how they approach the coding for a qualitative discourse analysis. And we also talked very briefly, well, in one session about reception studies, so how we can study people's reactions to media content. And the main message of that session is it's really hard to do, so just really don't think about it when it comes to your dissertations. And that's the other most relevant place. So they do dissertations. It's weighted under less than a third of the whole their whole degree, but it occupies quite a bit of time, especially as the year progresses. And we have one workshop early on in January, just reminding them of research methods and getting them to think through about the strengths and weaknesses. Most of these dissertations will be case study based, and they'll also have been doing case study analyses in other modules. And many draw on interviews, and they'll have been doing interviews in some of their practical work. And again, we stress a common sense approach. If as a journalist you understand how to do an interview, actually it's not fundamentally different when you're doing interviews for research. Maybe you think about the ethical issues a bit differently, but it's not hugely different. I think I've gone over my 8 minutes, so should I shut up now, friends?
How much time do you need more?
Well, I'm sort of getting there. I mean, that's all quite rushed. I guess what I would say is, so the dissertations is where their research skills come to the fore, and they write 10,000 words based on a project of their own choosing, and they have to work out what methodology is most appropriate to the question they're wanting to answer. And whilst the students take very happily to the humanities approach in the taught academic modules, I think the dissertation is where they struggle a little bit more, not least because they're very busy with other things throughout that period. And in that respect, it's a bit different from some other master's programs. So they're doing practical project work alongside. They're also doing work placements at the same time for part of that period. So I think writing at length, doing a large investigation like that, the risk is they default to science mode and they're overly influenced by their experiences of doing a dissertation as undergraduates in science department. So I think we struggle a little bit more to have them complete that humanities journey in the dissertation module.
Thank you very much, Felicity, for a wonderful talk. Of course, before I give the floor to the audience, I should have said social science research and humanities research, because these are two different things.
Yeah.
Who has a question? You can raise your hand or put something in the WhatsApp or in the app, in the forum. So your students sort of start with being a natural scientist or life scientist, and in the end, after about a year, they're sort of halfway towards being a humanities student as well.
Yeah, well, I'd like to say they're humanities students sort of technically the minute they arrive. In terms of their orientation, I think they get there quite quickly. They certainly embrace that critical understanding of science in society. In terms of being fully fledged sort of research ready, they don't quite get there, but that's not our task. Our task is to prepare them for jobs as communicators in journalism or museums or wherever. And I think they do acquire enough of a critical disposition to aid them in that, at the same time as also a lot of, unleashing their creativity. And again, that's why the humanities is more of a draw for us, because of its close allegiance with the arts. So we'd think of ourselves as humanities and arts studies.
We have some questions in the chat. The first one is by April. I wonder if you would describe the creative project. What does it involve?
Good question. And I think our students might ask that question as well. So it's a group project, and we simply tell them you're going to make something during this term, and it's going to reflect what you've learned in the academic modules in the first term. So they're reflecting on this sort of critical understanding of science and society, and it's led to a whole load of, crazy things. Like one year there was a Punch and Judy show, I think. I can't remember how that. Oh, they were philosophers of science. Yeah, Bacon sort of bashing Popper over the head. Another year we had a sort of anarchist intervention across college, with posters going up saying science is revolting, and drawing very much on Paul Feyerabend's philosophy of science, and trying to provoke a response around the college. Another year we had a shadow sculpture, and these students had gathered up materials from labs around college and made this big mess in the middle of a room. Just a mess of microscopes and books and journals and a bottle of wine and some money, all the things that go into science, to illustrate the mess of science. And then they turned on a directional light, and it cast a shadow on the wall, of a perfect shadow of Newton sitting under the tree with the apple falling. And so that was a comment on how the mess of science gets converted in public messages into this sort of stereotype of a neat and finished sort of genius moment. So yeah, a whole range of different stuff, and very much about unleashing their
It makes me
creativity.
very curious. Yeah, if you have pictures of these, I will be. I'm interested. Okay, I'm going to the next question. What was the reason, says Anne Dijkstra, what was the reason for the choice to focus on the humanities orientation?
Yeah, good question. And given the age of the degree, it's probably lost in time, that one. But the degree was set up by Professor John Durant and his then PhD student Jane Gregory. Many of you might know Jane Gregory. And they were both working in the history of science. John Durant was at that time, had a post at the Science Museum in London. So I think it was partly just, their natural inclination as historians. Um, and at that time, there was very little worked in science communication at all. And so probably not much at all, even in the more social science end of communication studies, had hardly looked at science really. So I think it was across the UK, science communication and science studies, a sociology of science, to a large extent was influenced by the earlier development of cultural histories of science. So I think it was just that historical context, historical in two senses. But it has continued to make sense for us, because we're trying to stop them thinking like scientists. And the problem with social science methods is it's sort of replicating scientific methods. So we're trying to get them to question claims about objectivity or reproducibility. And I think the critical questioning of the humanities is better placed to help them do that than social science methods, which look often very much like they're making the same claims that scientists are making. I know obviously that's a rather controversial thing to say, and there's a whole spectrum from qualitative through to the more quantitative methods in social sciences. So I'm not trying to cast aspersions on the social sciences, but I think it's just a clearer separation that we can make by emphasizing the humanities and the critical analysis.
Good point. Although I doubt whether everyone here will agree with you that humanities are better suited for teaching science communication than social sciences. But anyway, the first, the next question is Marina Joubert. Do we have some text, essay or similar explaining the differences in research and theoretical approaches between natural sciences and social sciences or humanities?
Who's the we in that question?
Do we have something? Perhaps, Marina, could you explain a bit more?
Anyone? Okay.
Anyone? Okay.
I mean, at Imperial, we don't have any text that we use sort of exploring that specifically, but we do a lot with the students about the philosophy of science and sociology of science. As I said, sort of taking apart some of those claims that scientists make. But yeah, we don't, because we don't really teach methodology up front, we wouldn't be looking for texts sort of getting into that difference.
Okay, thank you for this, Felicity. Thank you very much for doing this.
Questions, just
oh, there's one more. Well, yeah, we should move on to the next speaker. So that reminds me. But perhaps a final question then, but very briefly, do you provide the students with certain handbooks or something to quickly learn the methods, for example? Even when do you teach?
Just some detailed assignment briefs for that first core module, and then a paragraph about different methods in the dissertation handbook. So very little.
Thank you for this. We need to stop here. So thanks all. It's also almost past the hour.
For me to leave,
and you need to go on your holiday now.
Yeah,
so thank you very much, Felicity.
Thank you everyone, and I hope that was helpful. And sorry,
It was very helpful. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to our next speaker then. And our next speaker is going to be Julia Serron, and she is a research director at the Munich Science Communication Lab in Munich, in Germany. And she provides the perspective of doing science communication research. She is also a research associate to the Institute for Communication Science and Media Research. And Julia has a background in journalism and communication studies, and she also publishes on these topics. Julia.
Yeah, hello, Franz. Thanks for having me. Do you see the presentation mode already?
No, not yet. It's not the presentation mode.
No, I think so.
Now it is. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you for having me here. I will just start directly into my presentation, and I'm already really curious and looking forward to the discussion, especially on the topics we already touched after the short talk of Felicity, like the question of methodology and so on. So I don't know if I'm really going deeply into that, but yeah, well, in Germany we have not so many really formalized programs for educating students from STEM research in the field of science communication research. So I'm myself located at the Department of Media and Communication Research, and there we are often confronted with students also from other fields of media, also from the practice of science communication, and they come up with an idea and they want to do science communication research. And usually what happens is that they start with an issue, you know, basically often related to what they studied before, like climate change, or right now very popular artificial intelligence or other technological innovations, or specific topics like food waste or proteins, or some kind of materials they are dealing with in engineering, or a specific disease, etc. And I think this might be a good starting point for doing science communication research and finding a target audience who's already interested also interested in that. But I think it's not a good starting point to do science communication research or to learn that. So I would recommend those who teach science communication research to help the students a bit by changing the process and starting by asking, where does this science communication I'm interested in actually happen, in what kind of field? And also, very much at the beginning, ask myself, why does it happen there? And who is communicating about these issues, like the communicators, but also the target groups. And then, Felicity touched upon that already, the question concerning the content. So what do they actually communicate? And perhaps very late in the process, I can ask the research field, so which scientific topics are involved in this communication. So we know that the field of science communication research is growing rapidly, and it's not a closed, like a very integrated field, but we see different areas of interest. So of course there is a lot about science journalism. This is what Felicity also talked about already, like you ask your students to collect some news articles on a specific topic. This is like what I would say the traditional approach. But of course, we have a growing field of strategic science communication, mostly done by research institutions, so the whole field of science public relations. Then also, and this is getting more and more into the focus of science communication research, the whole field of science education, mostly happening also at museums, for example, but also at other research centers or institutions. And closely related to that, but I would say with perhaps a bit of different focus, the field of science engagement. And I also put this science communication in socio-political context here, mostly happening in social media. Of course, there is science PR and science journalism and science education happening in social media. But I think what we also observe is that with social media and this whole new environment that is evolving there, we sometimes see that science communication is happening outside of these strategic or structured or organized fields of communication, but just coming along with certain issues, and often in this political context. Then also what I think is perhaps a bit in the shadow of the research field, but highly important, as we noticed today, is this field of scientific policy advice. Hard to do research in that because it's always happening, in the shadow, a bit in the dark, and it's hard to communicate with people about this topic, but also in a very interesting research field. And then this whole field of internal science communication, and of course the boundaries between external and internal science communication are blurring currently, as we see with open science and preprint service, etc. Coming to the next step in this process, why does science communication actually happen? I know that we talk a lot about these different paradigms of science communication, which perhaps might also change chronologically, historically, but although right now in the present time we see all of these paradigms still in action, still valid. We know that we talk a lot about the deficit model. Where it, well, I'm not going into detail. If you have any questions to that, I think I can explain later. But we know that there is a movement also in normative concepts from the deficit model via dialogue models in the direction of more participation and openness. And again, here we see that right now, we talk a lot about problems in this field of science communication outside of professional science communication within socio-political debates. And I think this is important that we reflect upon that and that we teach students to reflect upon that when doing their own research. And then I can ask myself, who is actually communicating about what and with what effects? So we are interested in communicators. We are also interested in content and the media applied for science communication. And of course, there's a lot of research concerning the use and the effects of science communication. And I just put here some examples because there are different fields of research of communication science, but also of other disciplines that are involved in this research. And this might be the first moment where students are a bit confused, you know, when they come up with a topic and they Google, you know, food waste science communication, then they come up with so many different perspectives on this issue that might be focusing more on the communicators, or the research is focusing more on the contents itself, searching for narratives, etc. Or it's an experiment, you know, investigating the effects of a certain communication strategy. And I think it's helpful to students get some kind of overview about these different perspectives on the field of interest. And here the question comes up, what kind of methods I actually need to use. And yeah, sorry, I didn't prepare anything about the question for on methodology, but I think of course it's highly relevant. And I think, well, I would even disagree a bit with this idea of, you know, when you know how to do a journalistic interview, that's basically the same as doing a research interview. I would disagree on that, but we can talk about this later. So what is happening, and then you come up with your issue, and there again we see we have a broad variety of different fields of topics, of issues that we are interested in, and then again, when you focus on a specific topic and issue, and you say you are interested in climate change, or you're interested in the communication about a specific disease, or a disease in a socio-political context, like, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic, then again, you will see that you are confronted with certain other disciplines. And therefore, I'm even a bit hesitant to say it's science communication, a research field in its own. Yes, on the one hand. On the other hand, it's highly interdisciplinary, and I think that's good, that's okay, because we benefit a lot from other disciplines here, like, for example, sociology or communication studies, but also political sciences, psychology, or public health, etc. So, and I think as a teacher, or as an advisor, as a mentor, I think it's part of this job, you know, to orient the students a bit and to help them dive into these fields at the border of their fields of interest and their research topics. So to come to a conclusion, I would suggest that first the students start to choose the context of the application where their research findings are relevant. For example, journalism or strategic science communication. Then they reflect on the normative ideas and values which are currently, you know, there in their field, or also implicitly in their own question, that they define the area of interest, if they are more interested in what the communicators are doing, or more in the effects or specific target groups, that they then try to take on a perspectives from these different disciplines mentioned, and then start setting a starting point, going out, you know, for example, choosing a specific theoretical approach, or if there is none, at least a specific concept, like, for example, trust. And from that on, they would follow a comprehensible pathway, let's say a specific method or a mix of different methods, and then they are just in the middle of the process and already doing research. And I would say then go off for it and enjoy. That's it from my side, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Julia. Very nice talk. As we agreed, we will take questions after Louisa has also entered her finished her contribution. I have one question for clarification. One quick question: is your the student population that you have is mainly social science students?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
These are students social science and specifically communication science.
Okay. Yeah. Then I have a follow-up question, but I'll save that for after Louisa has also given her talk. So thanks again, and we get back to you in a few minutes after Louisa has finished. And not a few minutes, 8 to 10 minutes, Louisa. Okay, thanks again. And then Luisa Massarani. Luisa is the coordinator of the National Institute of Public Communication of Science and Technology. And she is a researcher at the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. In her talk, she will describe the context of her master program. In her program, both the Brazilian and international context are relevant. Luisa has a background in science journalism, and she's been active in science communication throughout her career. She publishes on topics such as science journalism, social media, climate and pandemics communication. Luisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Franz. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I see that a lot of friends and colleagues are here joining us today, which is wonderful. I would like to highlight that it's today with us Luisa Morim, who is the Deputy Coordinator of the Master of Science, the Communication of Science, Health, and the Communication of Science, Technology, and Health in Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, which is my organization. It was created almost 10 years ago in 2016, and it's quite interesting to note that actually in the Master in Science Communication that Felicity presented is a kind of, let's say, the first generation of masters, which was basically more like Europe and the United States. And this master that I'm talking about is one of the last worldwide, and it was created, I thought, 10 years ago, but in a very different context that Felicity mentioned. And it's the first one in Rio de Janeiro, where I am based. It's the second one in Brazil. The first one in Brazil is in São Paulo, and it was created in 2007. And so it's very symbolic to mention my trajectory as researcher in science communication. My background was social communication in the university degree, and then my master was in information science, and my doctorate was in biochemistry. And it sounds really awkward, a kind of awkward is, but it's the way that it was possible to do research in science communication in my country. So everything that I did in my whole life in my professional life was about science communication, both practice and research in science communication. And that was the way that I could have a doctorate in science communication. And because of that, when we decided, we created a diploma course, I think 10 years before the master, and it was a kind of warm-up for creating the master. We really wanted to have a master, and so this group of people, where we had some reasonings for creating the master in the way that we created, which is very different from the one that Felicity presented. And one of the reasonings is because of my trajectory, we observed that actually research is very different according to the different fields. And science communication is multidisciplinary, is interdisciplinary. And because of that, we really need to allow people to do research using approach from different fields. So I was very annoyed when I was, for example, teaching science communication in an education program, and they were trying to tell us what was right and wrong. Or when then I went to a history program, and they was telling us that that was right or wrong. And so obviously, we need to do good research. We need to keep the quality of the research. But as a multidisciplinary field, we really need to recognize different kind of ways, strategies, and methodologies for doing research. So because of that, the first decision was to accept students from all the different fields. So we have people from biology, physicists, health field, education, museology, art, theater, and etc., and a lot of different etceteras. And also in terms of teaching the theory, this means that it makes our lives very complicated, right? Because if we want to keep a high quality of research, and if we want to respect the different fields, we really need to try to present a different panorama of research and methodology, and allow the students to do their research in different fields. And going back to the question that Marina Joubert put in the chat, we don't have a text that explain how is research in the different fields, which obviously make the life of both the docents and the students more complicated, but we think that's very worth to do it, and the quality of our dissertations are very interesting. So that was one of the first aspects that I would like to mention. The second aspect that I would like to mention is that we are working in Brazil, specifically in Rio de Janeiro. We really want to look at what is going on in different parts of the world. We really want to look at the international literature, which is very important and very good, but we also want to look what is going on in terms of practical science communication, and also methodologies and theoretical science communication in Brazil and in Latin America. So we try to present both. There is this term glocal, right? We try to bring both the international literature and also present what is going on in our region. So in terms of how we do that, we have only two mandatory disciplines, modules. One is the very first one that we provide, which we call Introduction of Science Communication. I deliver it with Luisa Morim, who is here today. And the idea is to talk about science communication, both from the history of science communication. So, for example, we start the model presenting the history of science communication in Brazil, which is very complex and beautiful, and people don't know very well. And we try to do some also in terms of Latin American, but it's a short model, so it's not that possible to do that. And then we try to bring the diversity of the field in terms of methodologies, bringing people who talk about different ways of doing research in science communication. We have a kind of panorama that we like to present, but also obviously when we start the model, we look at what the students are looking at in their dissertation, in their research, and then we can adapt according to the students. We have about 15 students every year, and so I think that what I would like to say as warm-up is that I guess that now we can also talk a bit more in terms of questions and comments of you guys who are joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Louisa. This rounds up the talks, and I think we have had a great variety of the ways that we in Munich, in London, and also in Rio de Janeiro approach the way that we teach our students. First of all, a variety of student population, but secondly, also a variety of approaching how to teach research skills to our science communication students. I have a question, what the others can think and write their questions in the app or pose a question themselves. I have a question for the two of you. And a follow-up question for Julia, first of all. If I'm correct, so most of your students, or all of your students, are from the social sciences, such as the communication sciences. It's sort of the other way around, because we have in Utrecht, for instance, most of our students come from the natural and life sciences, and we have to teach them social science, social research skills. But for you, it's perhaps the other way around. I guess you need to teach them what natural science is. So about the content, the actual content of what they're studying. So it's a question for you, and for Louisa, a similar question. You have a mixed population of natural sciences and art students. How do you deal with that? Because they come from completely different directions. So first, Julia, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at the Munich Science Communication Lab, we are focusing on the field of planetary health, which is really complex. And I mean, we are, I think, in the 3rd or 4th year, and I'm still struggling myself with this whole issue. So of course, it's sometimes hard, you know, from a social sciences perspective to enter a science communication field or issue which is so complex, even with I mean, not only one discipline, but it involves different disciplines. However, I think for doing science communication research, it's not, I mean, it's necessary, of course, to understand a bit the research field, also the logic, let's say the way how the evidence is produced. For example, in planetary health, we have these problems that medicine works totally different than climate change research, you know. Medicine starts like bottom up with the case study, and then they make a randomized controlled trial, and then they have these epidemiological studies, and the climate change research is coming top down. You know, first they collect data on a global scale, and then they try to narrow it down on local effects and try to find solutions for that. So for me as a social science researcher, it's important to understand the practices of evidence we face in other disciplines. But for me, it's not so much important to understand the structure of a certain protein or something like that. You know, for me, it's still about the process of communication, and therefore I try to explain that this is much more interesting and important to decide, am I interested in the communicator or in the content, and what is interesting about the content is relationship between different materials, let's say journalistic articles and press releases, or is it just the way they use the language? No, this is sometimes the hardest part to decide together with the students what is actually the research question, you know? Yeah.
I know sometimes the research question is lacking in, at first. Louisa, what is your answer to this question? How do you deal with this variety of students in your population?
Yeah, sure. That was a question that we had before, whether it would be better to have a more focused group of students, and then we could shape and make more focused the discussion, or whether we wanted to go as we decided, as in a broad way. We know that there are advantages and disadvantages with both decisions. We thought that it would be better to have a wide way, a very diverse approach for the students, because it was richer. And two things that I was supposed to say and I forgot was that I mentioned that we have two mandatory modules, and what we do is that we have other modules which are not mandatory, that we can go further in some of the aspects. For example, there is a whole module on audience that you can discuss other kind of approaches, focusing for those who want to look at visitors of museums or other kind of audience in terms of social networks, for example, etc. And also another decision that we did that is very important is that the lecturers who join us, we are probably 15 or 20 in the present moment, and we have very different backgrounds. So what we do is that according to the topic of research of each student, we try to put as supervisor the person that we think that because of their background, they can be more sure, he can be more useful for the students. So I think that it helps a lot.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this. There's a question by Emma Gill. And she asks, I love the transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary approach. Louisa, what has surprised you the most during the development of your course? I think it's program, I guess. Our course is as in program.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emma, for your question. I think that the way that we decided in an open way means that we have a lot of surprise all the time, because this means that the student brings, they have their voice very strong in our master, and they bring a lot of new surprises and questions and ways of doing research. So I cannot remember right now a specific things that surprised the most. But I think that is the everyday life with the students. They bring their ways, and we had a whole pandemic in the middle, right? Which also brought different kind of questions and also different kind of methodologies. Because before we are doing, and I say that in terms of science communication research in general, we were doing much more smaller research, and then we started being challenged with a lot of studies that are actually related to big data. So we had to redesign our brains to deal with different research and different methodologies. So for example, trying to remember one of my students, before the pandemic, he started 1 week before the pandemic reached Brazil, and he had a kind of specific study, and then he changed everything, and we had to change together because he wanted to look at COVID and newspapers. And so we start thinking the same way before, and then 2 weeks later, I said, we need to rethink everything. Let's restart thinking in a different way. So actually, he learned a lot of stuff that much more related to computational science, which I don't know at all, but he was the one who learned everything and did a wonderful work. So I think that this kind of beautiful surprise we see a lot.
I was wondering, Julia, and then also for Louisa, do you know what your students are going to do afterwards? So after their master or research with you, Julia?
Well, I think the most of the students go to various kinds of strategic communication. Well, when they focus on science communication, I mean, there are a lot of NGOs in that field working on that. Also, the growing field of communication of academic institutions. So this would be the broadest part. But I think especially the students of science communication are also interested in staying at the university and staying in research, because they see that it's a growing field and it's getting more attention at the universities, and there are more, research clusters like our lab and other things. So I think this is the field where students are especially interested in doing more research.
That's for your case, but you don't teach the future practitioners, the people that work for science centers or become science journalists.
Well, I mean, usually the media and communication studies, at least in Germany, are a bit more academic than in other European countries. Okay. So, so there is always a bit of a gap between practice and theory or research, let's say. But I wouldn't say that we are not preparing the people for that. So we also have practice courses and so on. But as I said again, we have no special program for science communication. This is not a course for learning specifically science communication, but they have a universal, like general program, master's degree, for example, for communication studies. And then they focus within that on the issue of science communication, and hear lectures on that and doing their research project, and that actually quite longer than in the courses you presented here. But then they have a basis on social sciences. I think this makes all the difference. So they know how to apply the methods. And usually they're also a bit trained in different theoretical approaches.
Okay, thank you. And Louisa, where do they end up?
Yeah, in my institution, we do have a very good track of the students, what happened with them after the master. And we have, because we have so diverse students, we have also diverse ways of them in the future. So part of them, for example, they work already as science journalists or in a science center, and they want to do it to be better as working as professional. So they keep going what they were doing before. Some of them are researchers in science communication, or they want to do research in science communication. And then after the master, they follow a doctorate. So last week, one of the students from the master just got his doctorate in another program. In 2 weeks' time, another student will get her doctorate in another program. So it's very diverse. And we do, as I mentioned, we do have a beautiful way of tracking them, and some of them just do something else. As maybe 1/3 or a bit less than 1/3 just do something else. But I think that clearly our master are making stronger the other part of the students, the most of the students, as working in practice in science communication or in research in science communication.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? I don't see any other questions appearing right now. You can raise your hand, or you can even just interrupt us and show yourself. No more questions? Okay, in that case, I'd like to thank you, Louisa and Julia, for preparing this. Already for months, it was known that you would do your presentations, and finally it has happened. We have recorded this session, so in the end, you can, within a few days' time, it will also be available through the PCST website. So thank you for this. I also like to thank Felicity, who has already left the webinar, and I'd like to thank Elizabeth, because together with her, I organized this, and also April Eichmeyer and Mark Bos have played a role in this. And I'd like to thank Siddharth for his technical and moral support. So thank you all for this. And here I'd like to close this webinar. So have a very good day, and I hope to see many of you in Aberdeen in May.